Imagine you've been following the journey and struggles of a group of characters over a story with much loss and change, only for the climax or epilogue to result in a complete return to the status quo, as though nothing had ever been lost. For many, you may not have to hypothesize, as reset endings are unfortunately more common than they should be. As with all things, it's all down to execution, as some series will use the resetting of a character's memory or experiences as a means of tragedy for either them or other characters. But, as with all things too, the percentage of works to utilize this trope with good writing will often be in the minority, and the majority will lead to disappointment for the audience. This is especially so concerning time travel, in which fixing everything through a time reset results in some of the worst cases of plot conveniences, fixing an ending in however the character sees fit 9 out of 10 times. That said, cases of using a reset in a way that enhances a narrative rather than damages it usually has to focus on how it affects the characters involved, or be a give and take situation. You may expect me to talk of Dragon Ball concerning how to handle resets, with how often characters are revived at the end of an arc, and it wouldn't be out of place to discuss it. Many of the dynamic character arcs help provide reason beyond the utilitarian to keep them around, such as the events after his demise on Namek and the change it causes in motivation, makes Vegeta at the end of and after the Frieza arc significantly different in motivation and approach to his initial self. The last case of a mass revival in the original manga is indeed a fulfilling case, not only due to it allowing all those on Earth, Namek, and in the other world come together to stop Buu, rather than the erroneous interpretation of Goku taking the win, but it also has some level of a Judgment Day aspect, with only the evil individuals not being revived, in a manner fitting for what Toriyama intended to be the conclusion of the franchise as far as he was concerned. Again, another reason why milking the franchise past the end of the manga did more harm than good. Despite the Majin Buu arc doing an adequate job, however, I wish to talk about another pillar of Weekly Shonen Jump that accomplished elements of a reset to perfection. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has become as major of a hit in the West's anime and manga community in the past decade as it's always been in Japan. Some would write it off as just a funny meme show or cool action show that, while being that, is also one with significant depth to something such as the many characters within it, aspects of thematic opposition, or how plot devices such as fate are explored thorough enough to be genuine observable forces rather than plot convenience. Many of these elements come together in the 6th part of the series, Stone Ocean, with what was the antagonist Pucci's plan to reset the universe after evolving his stand to its final stage, Made in Heaven. As I assume anyone watching this is already familiar enough with the material due to obvious major spoilers, I won't go into the logistics of the Heaven plan as that's already been broken down elsewhere, and doing so here would only make this more verbose. I will mainly discuss 3 core narrative elements, being Pucci's temporary victory, its undoing, and the implications of it. Pucci goes beyond what any previous JoJo villain had done, except technically Kira, in successfully killing the entirety of the main cast bar Emporio, including what could be considered the face of the franchise, Jotaro Kujo, and his daughter and Part 6 protagonist, Jolene. This warrants some focus given to it in this action to set up the climax being accomplished through the series' rules on fate in how circumstances favour those who are resolute, willing to make sacrifice, and fight for ideals beyond themselves. Pucci succeeds in all 3 areas and gains strength from the ideas Dio instilled within him, as well as fighting for the goal of what they both believe to be the benefit of humanity's future rather than the desire to be the ultimate power, as with antagonists such as Kaz or Diavolo. He is willing to sacrifice his senses and familial bonds in order to achieve his goal, and he never gives into despair or madness, with him always focusing on Dio's ideals, or sometimes prime numbers, to keep him on track. This gives him the same broad method that allowed many of the protagonists in the series to overcome their circumstances, which allowed him to be more formidable than any prior villain, and, for a while, achieve his goal of a universe in which people are aware of their prior dire fates, and would find peace in knowing what their life holds. Those who died prior to Made in Heaven's time acceleration causing the prior universe to reach a singularity point, however, are not carried over to the new universe, which establishes the true loss of characters we followed on this past journey. Despite this, Pucci is defeated by Emporio using the stand disc of Pucci's brother Weather Report that was given to him by Jolene, so that the two people with the greatest ties of conflict to Pucci can vicariously give him the final blow. As this is done at a date in the new universe before Pucci originally attained Made in Heaven, this causes Pucci's new universe to be erased and a third one to come about in which humanity no longer knows their predestined fate, and Emporio is reunited with altered versions of the main cast he knows that seem to have better lives than their original counterparts, in a universe where neither Pucci nor Dio existed. Such is emphasized even more by the anime's credits, which imply the characters of all 6 main parts in this timeline came together under far more positive circumstances. This is a different kind of reset from what many series do, as not only are the deaths of these individuals undone in a way, but their entire character history. Unlike with many that will use this just to attempt a happy ending, the focus given to Emporio makes the tragic element of this apparent, as the history he had with Jolene, Anasui, and the others is unknown to their counterparts Irene, Anarchis, and the rest, which is highlighted with the final panel of the manga and shot before the anime's credits of the deceased main cast, whose stories and struggles have been lost completely. Even if they now exist as people with happy lives, the sacrifice of their previous selves will weigh upon both Emporio and the audience. This idea also harkens back to the ideas of the previous part, in which one who only cared about the results without going through the proper process of attaining them, as with Diavolo, was punished for such a mindset. The results are happier existence for what is physically Jolene and the rest, but the process that led to it still brought about the loss of the characters we knew. It's not as though the bittersweet idea of these characters being lost to give alternate versions of themselves with happier lives alone is what makes this ending perfect. Going back to Dragon Ball, we see in the spin-off Dragon Ball Super how one can completely fail at a similar concept. The end of the Future Trunks arc, with Future Zeno destroying Future Trunks' timeline in what's completely antithetical to the themes of the arc, with Trunks and Mai simply going back to a point in the future before Goku Black led to the loss of future Burima's life. The anime attempts to provide some grace to this optimistic result in it still not bring back the universe Trunks lost, and the awkwardness that there'd be with another of him and Mai in this timeline. But the attempts at loss in this narrative are made meaningless compared to in Stone Ocean for several reasons. Unlike with Irene, Anarchis, and the other third universe counterparts of Part 6, this version of Buruma is a carbon copy of the one he lost. We also never see the results of him going to this timeline. Not to mention the idea that it just be like his goes against what Trunks' debut arc had taught us about how timelines can be drastically altered, especially when he was leaving to this future through a timeline that had long since been altered to avoid his dystopian future. How does he not consider he'll just enter a timeline that isn't simply the main history of the series, but 12 years after Goku left with Oob at the end of the manga?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
The whole sequence of events leading to it also goes against the arc's themes of not relying on divine intervention, Trunks becoming capable of defending his own timeline, and bringing hope to a disastrous future. Though all these themes had already been executed in haphazard ways, the epilogue of the arc destroys them entirely, whereas Stone Ocean's ending enhances and reiterates the series' themes of the proper process, sacrifice, and the legacy its characters leave in our mind, even if the results of their actions are mitigated. Also, unlike with the prison group of Stone Ocean and Jotaro, whose journeys we fully experienced with each of them being very fleshed out, the Buruma of Trunks' timeline only has a few slight differences from her main counterpart beyond age, which makes her end, and, furthermore, those of her entire universe, have far less impact on the audience than the losses of several other characters in the series as far as the audience is concerned. It isn't simply the ramifications of Stone Ocean's reset that provide a profound loss to the audience, but the care put into character writing of those affected, and how it ties into the wider concepts of the series. Thus, the conclusion of the original continuity of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a perfect blend of the bittersweet results sacrifices brought to attain them, narrative and thematic cohesion with what had already been established, as well as simply being an ending atypical of its demographic done with great care to provide the best finale to a JoJo part, even if I'd admit Part 6's quality as a whole wasn't as consistent as with some others. Remember that, even if the physical events of a story are reset, whether or not the prior events still matter or are made meaningless comes about from the proper care a writer gives to the consequences of this.